welcome everyone for showing up. I think we're on track for 140. Yeah, almost one. If they want to walk in there, they can. My name is Justin Ryan, and the talk here is Configuration as Code, Adoption of the Job DSL Plugin at Netflix. I will talk very fast. I'm sorry if I'm talking fast, trying to get a lot of content in here. We'll be talking a little bit about Netflix, talking a little bit about the Job DSL plugin that I work on. If I go fast, the slides will be up on SlideShare later, also be recorded, you can watch it later. And hopefully, if things go well, I'll have a little time at the end for Q&A. So hopefully that'll come up. To get started, let me talk a little bit about, how would that? So I mentioned my name, Justin Ryan. You can reach me jryan@netflix.com or on Twitter. I'd like to take a little extra shout out for one of my coworkers, Kurt Patrick. So I work mostly on writing the Job DSL, so I'm quite familiar with it. Kurt is involved morely in working with teams and actually using it, right? Sort of the other side of the coin. So I really want to thank him for his help in this presentation as well as the insights he gets working with teams at Netflix on using the plugin. We're both on the engineering tools team at Netflix, and it's worth pointing out because it's a little bit of a different team than you might hear at other places. We're part of a larger organization that's responsible for making deploying to the cloud palatable. Right? The cloud is a different environment. It's not a data center. It is different. So we are part of a larger cloud that does the team that does that. We're specifically tasked with the building and the deploying aspects of it. We don't actually do any of the deploying, right? We're not a release engineering team or anything like that. We sort of are as a service to these other teams. Subject matter experts, maybe debuggers if there's something wrong in Jenkins or something like that. So we do have a little bit of a unique perspective when we look at Jenkins and the plugins and stuff. Not to say we don't use it for ourselves, but we see a lot of different use cases and we're trying to make those use cases easy, or keep the simple simple and keep the hard possible. This is combined with our freedom responsibility. This is sort of a Netflix cultural thing that you might have heard before. And if you want to know more about it, there's a slide deck out there. You can search for Netflix culture deck on Google. It'll come right up. Or listen to episode 28 of the Ship Show podcast, where we sort of, some people from our team talk about what that means for our team. But in general, I'll make some reference to it, but what it means is we're not here to tell other teams what to do, right? We're not telling them how they can set up their Jenkins jobs or their flows. We can give good hints, we can sell them good ideas, but we're not going to tell them what to do. Netflix is a big enough company with many teams, and they all choose to do things differently, and we completely embrace that. We're looking for best practices, essentially. We think that as a good thing. We can look at teams, see what teams do good things, see what teams do bad things, and learn from that experience. So that's where my experience comes from on the team. What it means is we don't have one single flow in Jenkins. This is not a monstrous web app that just all gets built in one build and then off it goes to production. It's made of lots of little services. Essentially, we have a service-oriented architecture with many, many little services that call each other in a very complicated, almost untrackable manner. It means that these teams are responsible for their own release cycles. These teams can go at different times. There is no cascading of this flow went and now go kick off this team's service to go deploy them. Every team deals with it on their own, which makes our job a little bit harder. Right? It's very hard for us to summarize this is the way to do things because every team is responsible for creating their jobs and running their jobs and potentially configuring them. And they're all going to configure them in different ways. So that puts us in a weird spot in trying to automate. So we've have to deal with this problem a lot. We're trying to get standardization, but without forcing people too much, telling them what they can or cannot do. As you might hear later in the lightning talk by Gareth Bowles, we have 3,200 active jobs right now that we have to manage. That's a lot of managing to do. So we're looking at it from a higher level to see how we can curate our Jenkins. What you can imagine happens, right? Not everyone's going to click new job and start from scratch. They're going to clone jobs. They're going to copy jobs. So we have a lot of that. We've provided some canonical jobs that we say, yeah, you should copy these jobs. They're great. Then other teams look at other teams' jobs and they copy those jobs. And then you get copies and copies and copies. In essence, it's a problem of complexity. There's just a lot of things going on from a lot of different people. And we haven't found a good way to capture that, or at least we didn't before we did the Job DSL. I will point out that our problems are not necessarily your problems. I mentioned a little bit about the cultural thing and how teams work, also how we choose to do scale is different. So if I talk disparaging about some other plugin, please don't. I'm not saying that using it is bad by any means, it just doesn't fit our use case. And I'm also not giving anything away saying that we use the Job DSL. It's in the title at the top. You may know that already. Hopefully not surprise now. But we did look at other plugins. We absolutely did. We had to. We don't want to write plugins. I'm lazy. I'm lazy enough to not go look at other plugins sometimes. If they don't have really nice screenshots with exactly my use case, it's a little hard for me to know to even use that plugin. But we did look at some other plugins, and they fit many use cases. And I could absolutely talk to you guys afterwards, maybe at the end of the last session about the pluses and minuses. But I can tell you they didn't fit our use case. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about those. The title might have sounded a little familiar, configuration as code. It'd be familiar because there's a lot of zeitgeist around infrastructure as code. Very similar. They too recognize sort of the problem about, or I should say, we've recognized that this is a problem with complexity. Other kinds of teams have had to deal with complexity before. You could look at, I'd say, the ops world, right? The ops world is being upended right now with Chef and Puppet, and what makes their complexity? How do you manage 1,000 servers? That is not an easy task to do, and you don't want to be doing it by hand. So they've come up and used Puppet and Chef. I mean, you'd be a little crazy to not use some sort of configuration management nowadays with thousands of instances. It's not too unsimilar to maybe how people used UML. You've probably all heard that we can't let our business analysts write code. It's too complicated, right? Complexity. So let's give them a UML, universal modeling language. Let's give them a UI that can drag stuff around. I've never seen that work. I've seen it in a few companies, and it never works out. I find that the devil's in the details. Everyone's got their own use case, and for every if statement that you might write in code, it's 10 lines to write some sort of checkbox in a UI, and then another 10 lines to look at that checkbox to see if you should do it or not. Sometimes I find that just writing a simple if statement in code is easier than writing the UI to allow that possibility. That kind of customization is just part of the real world. I think I'd be really surprised to find a company to say that has 100 teams and all 100 teams do everything exactly the same. And they like it, right? I'm not saying there's not companies that push upon them, you have to do it this way, but they don't like it. And we definitely believe at Netflix that each team should be able to do it whichever way they want to do it. And do all the customizations that that team chooses to do. I think if you look at the problem, we're writing code as code, obviously. We're doing our build in code, at least we're doing it with Ant and we're doing it with Gradle, those are both code. We got Chef and Puppet doing the infrastructure. Whole bunch of pieces of our infrastructure all being automated, except for the builds and the jobs. That was sort of this hole in the whole infrastructure as code problem that we want to try and solve. And we see the value in that automation. So we went forward working on the Job DSL and invested some time into it. It's infrastructure like anything else. These jobs are critical to us deploying to production, doing tests, all those kind of things. And anything that's that critical should be taught like a real citizen. Okay? It should be a real product. It should be just like your code. It should have code reviews. It should be checked into source control. You should be able to get reusability, right? You should be able to have higher level concepts, like take a bunch of this and put it together so someone else can use it. These are all concepts that we use when we code, and there's no reason we can't use it for our jobs. So from an automation point of view and from a team that offers value to other teams, their Jobs DSL would seem like the best solution that we could sort of come up with, because it can offer us everything that we need. So before I get into some of the gory details, not that this is going to be a top to bottom everything you need to know about the Jobs DSL, I will get into it a little bit, but I just want to show you sort of what's involved in creating some jobs out of it. It's relatively straightforward. We have a concept of a seed job. So, right, we're trying to create jobs here. Where is this going to happen? We like to do this from one job. We call this the seed job. And you add a build step called Process Jobs DSL. I'm not saying there isn't other ways to do this, but when I was learning how to write a plugin, writing a build step was one of the easiest plugins to write. So it was sort of a natural flow out of there. So you go into a freeform job, and you say Process Job DSL. You'll then be presented with a little radio box you can choose. It's sort of like the Groovy plugin. You can sort of choose the script to run, or you can choose a text box just to put your code right in there. For this, I just sort of showed you a reference to a file sitting in source control. Pretty straightforward, as far as I'm concerned, to just say, load my script. So you run the script, and magic happens. Now you have more jobs, a whole bunch of jobs. Jobs that make RPMs, run your tests, all sorts of stuff out of that one sort of Groovy file you saw there. And that's the goal here, right? Our goal here is to have one job goes off and creates other jobs. Okay, so that's where we're sort of going with this. I think one thing we learned in Netflix is that we can't be too opinionated as a tools team. I think when I look at the other plugins, they become a little bit opinionated, like they really care about implementing all the branches, right? Do this thing on all the branches. Oh, okay, that's nice, but sometimes I only want to do it on branches that have dates in the names, or I only want to do it if it's on Thursday or something. There's a lot of other complexities here, so we wanted code, and that's what this is. This is Groovy code under the covers. That's what you're going to see. Not to say knowing Groovy is a complete prerequisite. I'm going to sort of hold questions to the end. Just
actually, can you either not turn your head to the right or talk into the microphone?
try not to. You go a little lower. The screen's over there, so it's easier to look. I will stop doing that. Thank you. Essentially, you're running a Groovy script with one extra method. That's it, just one method called job. And as you can guess, that creates your jobs. But if it was just one method call, that'd be a little hard to squeeze in. You've guys probably seen method calls that have a few booleans in it. Can you imagine hundreds, if not thousands, of boolean calls in a function call? No, that's not how it works. We're using Groovy closures. So what you're passing to me is an executable block that the plugin controls, essentially. The plugin's going to mark it up and add some methods. And these are the methods that you're familiar with in your Jenkins configure screen. If you can imagine going to a job and hitting configure, you see your page, top to bottom, you're going to, though everything you see on that screen is essentially available in the DSL. Not to say we support every plugin, but we have 7 SCMs, we've got 6 triggers, 15 build steps, 28 publishers, and 20 wrappers. And it's growing every other day. I'm not going to say every day, but maybe every other day we get one more contribution from the community to add some new method. I will show you some examples, but I highly recommend you go to the wiki on GitHub, which is where we have most of our docs. And you should dig in pretty quickly into the DSL commands page, which has a high-level overview of all the commands that are available to see if it has your use case. The other thing is to delve into the job reference page, which is a top-to-bottom, full paragraph definition for every method, so that you understand how it works, what the arguments are, that kind of stuff. But let's look at a little bit of code here. So here's the job method I talked about. What you see next in the brackets is what we call a closure in Groovy. What it also you get in Groovy is that if the last parameter is a closure, you don't need the parentheses, or the closure doesn't need to be in the parentheses. So really, it's a method called job with one argument. We'll read it top to bottom. You specify a name. We set up source control as GitHub, or you could do Git directly. It doesn't have to be GitHub. You do Perforce. You could do Subversion. Do whatever you want. We support a bunch of them. The next thing, steps. So these are the build steps. So same thing in your configure page, top to bottom. Set up your source control, set up your triggers, set up your build steps, set up your publishers, and show up like this. So I would like to think that this is readable by most people to build a quick job off of GitHub, which is sort of the goal here. But you want simple to be simple, and that's what we have here. To take it to the next level, we're in Groovy code. So I'm going to dig in a little bit with you guys here and see some more advanced Groovy code here. I'm not so sure you really need to know Groovy to be able to understand this. By the 4th line branches, we're just calling some Groovy niceness where we can suck in a URL and get the contents. So in this case, we're actually grabbing a JSON blob from GitHub. So they're public API. You can call any API that you want. This is just my example. What I'm calling here is, give me all the branches. Just tell me all the branches. Great, now I have it in a Groovy object. And the very next thing I do is .each. That's an iterator in Groovy. So I'm going to iterate over each branch. And now you see that exact same syntax of a job, and I set a name, I set some source control, and I set a build step. So I've just sort of encapsulated the job stuff with some standard Groovy code. And there's nothing to you can't put Groovy code in the middle. You can put an if statement. Say if this branch is too long of a name, don't make a build for it. So you can do whatever you want, right? This is just imperative Groovy code that we're trying to accomplish here. But this is a really nice snippet, right? There's nothing, I can imagine plenty of places have an enterprise GitHub or a stash that you can call the REST API. I'll get a little bit more about the advantages of where you should store this list, this model of what your job should be. I'm not going to say it's all peaches and unicorns and wonderful stuff. I mean, it is Groovy code. There is some coding involved. There is no purely UI element to the job's DSL, but I have no problem, right? I think in more of a DevOps culture, we have the programmers are also the ones deploying, and this Jenkins thing's right in the middle. I mean, how could they avoid it? They're going to be writing Ansible code or Chef scripts or Puppet, and they're just going to need to know some coding. I find the developers are more comfortable with this setup. Because this is also the do not repeat yourself, right? So if you write 4 jobs and then you do it across umpteen branches, and you want to make one little change to those 20 jobs, you change one line of code. I mean, we all know the advantages of doing that kind of automation. So there is a learning curve, right? There's a new DSL, right? We're teaching you a new language. But you know Jenkins, so you probably know this language too. It's pretty direct mapping. I find that once you have one job with some stuff, it's a lot easier to tweak it, right? Add find bugs, add this publisher, add this, So I highly recommend just digging into it. It does seem overwhelming. I mentioned earlier about plugins. We don't support them all, right? The Jenkins community is absolutely ginormous for plugins, and we don't support them all, but we're happy to add them, and it's relatively easy to add. A vast majority of the Job DSL plugin is generating XML code. Now, hopefully you don't need to know that, it's under the covers, but Jenkins stores config XML files for its jobs. We are generating that config XML. So whatever you can do, whatever's in that XML, we can generate it. So if we don't have it now, we can show you how to do it on your own, and then we'll also show you how to contribute back to the project to share it with everyone else. It's a little bit of a mind shift too. I definitely have talked to developers and said, oh, we're going to create this job that creates jobs. And trust me, I have jobs that creates jobs that creates jobs. It's very meta, I get it. It's a little confusing. But it's entirely worth it given the time savings. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, right? I think before anyone invests in a plugin that maybe was abandoned, hopefully I can ensure you that this plugin is not just me and it's not just abandoned. At the last check for September on the Jenkins Confluence page, we have 480 installs, steadily climbing. That's a good number. It's no Chuck Norris plugin, but it's getting up there. Which is not the most, for your questionnaire, that is not the most popular plugin, just so you all know. There's an active Google group with 78 members on it. I think that's a really great thing to see is one plugin's got its own little community off to the side. The people who like this plugin love it. It saves them a lot of time, so they jump right in. They're willing to help out new users, answer questions. They have complex questions that we're happy to answer. I love to hear use cases, so we can turn it back around to maybe better versions of the Job DSL in the future. There's a regular Google Hangout. We find that sometimes email isn't great, so we just jump on a Google Hangout. We record these things for later posterity, so you guys can take a look at them. But it's a great way of just asking newbie questions. If you're like, is this even right for me? Jump right on. We're happy to help. Likewise, if there's no one really asking questions, we'll dig into some of the meat of the plugin to help us evolve it, because there's a lot of internals that we need to evolve. There's a constant stream of contributors, as in people come in, they say, this is great, it's missing my one plugin. So we teach them how to write the plugin, they give us the pull request, we add it back. That's what I was saying, every other day we add some new method. I'm really impressed by people coming in who have never written Java code, adding plugin support in the DSL, which is fantastic. Or Java veterans come in, give us a method, and we never hear from them again. It's too bad, but at least we benefited from the pull request. For core contributors, as much as I might have started the project, I'm not the only person. I mean, I've definitely gone on vacation recently for a month, and I was around, and the project kept on going. So we have about 4 people, myself, including myself, that have really dug into the core and ripped it apart and fixed pieces of it. So I just want to call them out. Daniel, Stefan, and Andrew, all based in Europe and not here. So it's a distributed team, I guess you could say, too. I'm going to give it some use cases. I know I talked a little bit of Netflix, and I'll get back to Netflix, but while we're in the middle of why you might want to use the DSL and you're thinking about it, let me see if I can hook you into actually using it. One of the use cases is from James Levison, who I believe is here. I'll say hi to him, ask him questions about his experience later at OPower. I don't believe James came into it knowing too much Java initially. I really don't recall. I don't want to do him a disservice. So he has some questions about Groovy and stuff, and as a community, we walked him through that. There's 1 or 2 plugins, like I think it was the multi-job plugin that you heard about earlier in the last talk. There was no support for it. I eventually found some time while watching some Arrested Development to add that plugin, and now we have it. And it benefited him, and he used it. And I think his use case is really interesting. There's 2 core things he does. He has one job that creates all his other jobs, right? The idea is that the model for his jobs is not even sitting in his Groovy script. It's sitting in a Grails app. The app most likely was just basic scaffolding. Just lets developers add, here's where my code is, here's some features I want, save. That's all the developer has to do. The C job can suck it in, generate the jobs that he feels is right for his company in that use case, and the jobs are there. And the developers don't have to worry about it. So this is a great use of tearing out the model, right? So I showed you earlier the GitHub example, going through the branches. Maybe I want to go through every project in my organization on GitHub. Right? So the model of what I want to build is already somewhere else. It's sitting in Perforce or it's sitting in Git. I don't need to recode it again in Jenkins. You know, I want the source of truth to be where it really is and not duplicate that. This is some of the example he wrote. So in a much bigger script, if you look at this, I'm hoping you can still understand what he's trying to accomplish. One thing you can see here is that he's doing a Maven project, right? So all jobs are XML and we can generate it. It takes a little bit of work to do a new kind of project type, but we do have preform in Maven right out of off the bat. But you can just see, sets a description, sets a label, sets up source control, sets up some publishers, and you can even see here the configure block, which is pretty advanced stuff, but he had to throw it in there because he needed some arbitrary XML the plugin didn't support. I think it's a really good example. Another use case is from Alan in the back. He does a really nice coupling of the Jobs DSL and the build flow plugin. So if you're not familiar, the build flow plugin is a DSL to chain your jobs together, right? So you can orchestrate the ordering of your jobs and how they get parallelized and how they join together and values you pull up from one and shove into another. It's great. What it does is it's a DSL for the flow of jobs. That's fantastic. Job DSL, great DSL for generating jobs. They go well together. It's another interesting point that we're doing no magic. We're not doing anything that Jenkins itself can't do via other plugins. We're not adding any magic here. We're just trying to populate those configuration values. So some people will come onto the mailing list and ask, you know, hey, can it do this, this, and that? No, the Job DSL only does what you can already do. If you can't show me how it's done in Jenkins via the UI, then I can't do it in the DSL. So getting back to Netflix. We as a team want to be a launching off point for other teams, right? We want to give them a really low barrier to entry to getting going and doing their Jenkins jobs and deployments and all that kind of stuff. So we want to be able to add value and, in the end, not gate them, right? We don't want them coming to us to say, I need to do a release or I need to make a Jenkins job. They should do it all themselves. So we do that by making our own DSL on top of this DSL. Once again, a little bit meta here. Like I said earlier, it's Groovy code, and we can make our own methods. So we did. We made a method called merge, because we know what merge jobs at Netflix look like. We then take these methods, we put into a jar, we release it, it gets put up into Artifactory as like an artifact. I mean, you know, imagine taking reusable bits of your Jenkins UI and bundling up and posting into Artifactory and releasing it. We really like this that has a real release process that we can track. And it's got different versions. And this guy's on 1.6 and he's on 1.7, and we can deal with those problems on their own. It's worth showing, because I think people leaving here, everyone has their own use case. Maybe you're the person who makes all the jobs for the whole company. Or maybe you're the one who knows what the best use cases are for other people. So this is for the people who are trying to offer value to other teams. So in this case, we just have a merge function. I'm not going to get too much into it, but you can tell there's a merge class. And on that merge class is a function called merge jobs. It looks like all the other job examples I showed you, so I'm not going to dig into the actual method. There's nothing fancy there. The one bit of fanciness, I do expose a little internalness here with the job factory. Don't worry about it. What they can tell us is the absolute minimum, if you follow certain conventions, what we would need to know to make your merge jobs, right? So we know typically you have a dev, test, prod branch, and you want to clobber from your dev to your test, and your test to your prod, and every once in a while you want to merge back from your prod to your test and test to your dev. So that's 4 jobs that every team pretty much has to create if they're going to have 3 branches. We know they do it all the time. So what we're doing here is simplifying those 4 jobs into one method call. This method takes a whole bunch of arguments that we can further customize. Like if, for instance, if your security group was not also your email group, you'd have to give us another parameter. Okay, that's just the way we chose to do it. So you see, it's very similar. If you want to simplify this code, that's left up to the reader if you guys want to do that. I'm just trying to make it look good on a slide. But if you ran this, you would get these 8 jobs. So 2 lines of code and 8 jobs that are exactly the way we, as engineering tools, recommends you set it up. That's a big win right there. Likewise, if we change the definition of that merge job, you know, maybe we add some conditional logic or we add some new emailing publisher in there, we change the template, we release the jar, they pick up on it, they generate new jobs, and all 8 jobs get updated. So they have to just run this thing once in a while. They don't have to worry about what is changing under the covers. They also can run it on their own time, right? I do not want to be the person who makes a change that breaks their build in the middle of a production push. Like, that is not where we like to be as a team. So they can regenerate their jobs on their schedule. And that's what we're sort of seeing here. It's worth pointing out that this is Groovy code, and we can then use the jobs as just objects and pass them around and loop them and do if statements and stuff like that. So I'm just going to walk you through this example. It's probably the last code example I have. The first bit of Groovy magic here, it's got 3 branches, dev, test, prod. We're going to iterate over them, taking the values out of it and putting it into another list. That's what the collect many is doing. We're going to do 3 things. We're going to create a quick build, right? So and that's just terminology. That's a domain-specific language to us at Netflix. CPF is the name of our AMP build system. Quick build implies that you're just going to build it really quickly, run the tests. That's it. Nothing else too fancy off of that. Then we're going to build a quality job, which would maybe run all your find bugs, the check style, and all your code quality stuff. Run sonar. Do all the stuff that makes your build take an hour when it should take 10 minutes. And that one's once a day. And the other one can be on every check-in. And then the last one would be a baked job, because maybe you like the output and you want the baked to go. I mean, I'm not getting too opinionated here, but I'm just trying to show that we can capture some pretty high-level concepts for what we do, put it into a list for all our branches. So what you see here would be 9 jobs. And if what the method I created or Kurt created didn't, let's say, do the extended email plugin, but you want to, well, take each job, iterate over it, add that publisher to it, right? These are full-blown objects that you can play with. It's not like you send us some configuration and it's done and you can touch that job. Until the script is done, the job is not committed back to Jenkins, right? We have to finish all the jobs and receive maybe a little bit of ordering, and then we save them back into Jenkins and stuff. So a lot of flexibility with how you want to customize your jobs, someone else's jobs, and muck with it. There's a little bit of other features that I just can't go over today with the plugin. One would be templates. You could say I'm going to build a job, but it's based on this other job. I personally don't use it. I'd rather capture the entire job in the DSL. Initially I thought I wanted templates, but I found over time I didn't. Some people do want that. It means that you could go into the template, make changes to UI, and theoretically your derivative jobs would get those changes. We don't do multiple levels. We don't get too fancy with it. It is single rooted. You can inherit from one other job. You can pull in environment variables. So if your seed job is parameterized for whatever reason, we can suck in those parameters or environment variables. When you're done building your jobs, you could queue them up to be built right away. So in the example of a seed job building a seed job, job making jobs that makes jobs, you probably want to kick off the seed job immediately after creating it. So we let you queue it up. Reading from workspace. So I talked a little bit about having a model for what jobs you want to create. And one way would be just to check it into a JSON file or a comma-separated file on your file system. This lets you read that file from the workspace. There's just a function there that makes it really easy to read that in and iterate over it. Configure blocks. I mentioned this earlier. It's a way of adding any XML that Jenkins needs to be happy. Right? So it might not be pretty, but if you view the config XML for a job, you can copy and paste it, and pretty much that's what the DSL will look like in a configure block. Not going to vary it too much. Maybe you take all your brackets, turn it into squiggly brackets. It's not that different. There's 2 Groovy things that's worth mentioning. One is grab. This is where you can sort of download a jar and then use it. So maybe you want to bring an HTTP builder. You want to bring Lava. Go right ahead. This is a full-blown execution, Groovy execution. Full independencies, no problem. And categories. I think this is another interesting thing. If you don't like the job object as it comes out of the DSL and you want to add your own methods, you can do that. That's what categories are for. So in this case, we added a add perforce function. It's completely specific to Netflix, right? It just sets all the perforce settings that are specific to us. You just give us one directory and we'll figure out the other directories you need and the user and the port and all that kind of stuff. Using categories, we can actually put that on the job object so that anyone in the company can just be using the DSL as normal and maybe that's a few extra functions. Hopefully this stuff is interesting to you and you'll leave here, so I'll try and give you some best practices that we've sort of learned, which you might not get into for a little while, but it might be nice to know about them before you get involved. I mentioned the source of truth, right? If GitHub or Perforce is your source of truth or it's a database that you do, maybe you have some sort of job that has to run every hour, but the thing that runs every hour is different. Maybe pull that out of a database, learn how to create your jobs. It's a little bit of a mind shift, I think, than going into Jenkins and creating all 24 jobs or whatever it is. But it's something to think about when you're evaluating where should you be building your jobs from. Putting stuff in source control, it's very easy just to keep hacking away in that little text box. Inevitably, you will mess something up and lose it. put in source control. It's great. And then you can do code reviews, put it through Garrett, anything that you need in that respect. I hopefully didn't scare you away from configure blocks too much. They are a little gnarly, but they do work. So if you need them, use them. Don't stop using the plugin just because we didn't have a DSL method for you. And then triggering on SCM changes. Hopefully as things change, you want those reflected in your jobs. I can tell you a little bit of future of the project, mostly because it concerns me and probably the contributors that do come in and help us with the project. We would love for plugins, Jenkins plugins, to contribute DSL methods to us. Right? They already have the XML object at hand. They know what XML gets serialized out as. If we could sort of delegate out to them to create the XML for us, that would be fantastic. I think that is really where the true proliferation of this plugin is going to be, is us pushing out this into all the other plugins. And work has sort of already started on that front on the mailing list. Let's see, supporting utility classes, probably don't have to worry about this. Another long-term goal was always to put this not only into source control, but maybe into your build. Right? If I download a project from GitHub, I would love to run a command from Gradle or from Maven that generates all my jobs into Jenkins. Right? Give it a username and password, pushes up the jobs up to my Jenkins. That would be really cool. If you're interested in a feature like that, please come and talk to me afterwards about that kind of additions we can give to the DSL. I'm always interested in other use cases, so if you have a use case, please ping me or any of the other Netflix people around who are familiar with the plugin, or jump on the mailing list. Catch us some other day. Running fast is in our favor, so I'm going to sort of wrap this up and we can get into Q&A or end early. Take a small break to thank our sponsors. This is a really great conference. It's great that we can do this, and we can only do it because we have sponsors. I do hope that maybe next year we can have a little more of an open space feel to it, or some BOF sessions. I think there's a lot of topics at this conference about the same stuff, right? So I'm talking about automation and creation of jobs. There's 3 other talks this year, 2 talks last year. I mean, it's a common theme, and we should all get together and talk about it. So maybe that can be for next year. If you want to know more about it, feel free to join us from the Google Hangout. Great place to just ask some open questions. There'll be one next month. If you want to learn more about this, just go Google Job DSL. Comes up, we have really good SEO. I have no idea why. I did nothing in that regard. We're very lucky to get to work on this kind of stuff at our job. It's not like something we do on the side. We feel very serious that the work that we can do can benefit all the other programmers at Netflix. And we are hiring. We're looking for people to maybe get involved in Jenkins, knows deeply Jenkins, and can also get involved in the community. We're not really looking for people to go off into the middle of nowhere and not talk to the community. We would love to come out and talk to people. I don't want to be giving this talk next year. I want someone else to be giving that talk. Feel free to talk to anyone in the red shirts if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what we do, how you can help us do it at Netflix. But that is the talk, sort of done, and we can jump into the Q&A. Wrap up then. Great. Thank you very much.